Good evening and welcome. It is fabulous to be here in conversation with Dov Forman, co-author of Lili's Promise. I was thinking that Dov is the youngest person that I've interviewed, but I realized that I have interviewed some hundreds of bar and bat mitzvah individuals over the year. So I speak to people when they are 12 and coming out to 13. And realizing that, I managed to find my notes from my interview with Dov, whose bar mitzvah was on 16th of December, 2016. And so I wrote down a number of things at the time, which I will have shared from the pulpit here, when he was here with Lili, who was basking in pride. And this is what Dov, aged almost 13, said: I like center stage. I complimented him at the time with the 35,000 plus pounds he'd raised for charity with the four sons. He got the Shevet Achim prize for charity at Emmanuel College. And he said, you should always help other people. It's a mitzvah. I wrote down that he was active, sometimes overexcited and jumpy. Those were his own words. And he said, if I'm interested in something, it engages me. And seeing the young man now, who is dapper and constantly in a suit and tie, I can see that he has found a certain calling. So at the time we shared some of his reflections on his great-grandmother, Lili, who is one of the amazing Holocaust survivors who has spoken extensively to many schools and shul audiences about her experiences and about the necklace that she managed to carry with her from her childhood in Hungary through to today. And on the necklace is a little angel. This is what I wrote. At the end of the mitzvah address. And Mrs. Ebert says that this piece of jewelry is her own guardian angel. And I think that she would be very proud now to acknowledge that her guardian angel, while valuable in a trinket, is actually, the preserver of her memory, and celebrating it is the young man who is her great-grandson, who shared the story then. And I spoke about the pasuk from your parsha, which was Ki im Yisrael, Ki sarita im Elohim, you wrestled with God, ve'im anashim, and with humanity, and you prevailed. And I think that's a lovely message with which to begin a discussion with Dov about the book, Lili's Promise. So Dov, welcome. What does it feel like to be promulgated to celebrity?
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Rabbi Lawrence, for the incredible introduction. I don't even remember saying half of those things, but
and you certainly don't remember me saying them to you either.
But on reflection, I guess, as you said, kind of very similar now, and a lot of the things that I said then about the centre stage very much still true now. I guess I feel quite proud that I'm able to have such a platform. On social media. We have almost 1.5 million followers. So I guess I'm very proud to have such a large platform to be able to share messages of the Holocaust and to be able to share my amazing great-grandmother, as you said, with the world. And hopefully people will learn a lot from her and from the work that we've been doing for the past year together.
Right. What engaged you in telling the story?
Well, I think from a very young age, I was always very interested in history, but mainly her story. And I always knew that she was a Holocaust survivor. I often get the question, when did you first start asking her, when did you first realize that she was a survivor? And it's a very tough one for me because there was never a time when I didn't know that she survived the Holocaust or that she was an Auschwitz survivor. But I think I really got my main passion for sharing her story during the lockdown because it was incredibly hard for me to see her being stuck at home and not doing what she loves to do the most, which is going out to young children in schools and universities and sharing her story. And so I decided that I was trying to help her. And the first time we actually organised an interview was on Zoom. And who would have thought 2 years later we'd still be sitting here on Zoom. but I organised a Zoom with my history teacher, and that was the first time that I had actually heard her full story from beginning to end in detail. And I think that really gave me the passion that I have now for Holocaust education and for sharing my story.
So I think one of the interesting things, and I do want to, and I'm going to constantly make reference to the book, because we're interested in people acquiring the book, which you can get in hardback. You can get it on your Amazon Kindle or any other e-reader. And of course, you can also get it on the audio books through Audible. So you can play it in the car, but you don't get Lili's voice when you're doing that, which is Is there any chance the microphone can be moved closer to the speaker, as the sound is very poor? I think it's this one. It should be. You know, if an iPhone 13 can't do it, we're really in trouble. They make films on this. So, okay, right. So speak as if you're addressing the whole of Kinloss. So, you know, on a Yom Kippur, try it like that. So right. I was talking about the book. I think one of the beauties of the book is, you know, even if you have heard Lili speaking extensively about her Shoah experiences and the lessons, this traces a family story which cuts through from childhood post-Shoah and time in Israel, and an opportunity to hear a reflection put in the perspective of time. So I think that's very nice. So what did you learn particularly while writing the book?
So I think firstly on your point about that, I think it's definitely a unique book of the Holocaust in the sense that most of the books focused either predominantly on what was lost and life before, but not many focused directly on someone's whole life. And I think this book isn't just about the lessons you can learn from the Holocaust, I think, or how someone survives Auschwitz, but I think it's in the subtitle itself, how she found the strength to live and carry on and build a family which is 10 grandchildren, 34 great-grandchildren, all of which are engaged in Yiddishkeit and Judaism. And I think that's the real testament that she won and the Nazis didn't. And then, sorry, what was the...
So what have you learned? What have you learned in that?
I guess I could sit here all night and give you a list of things I've learned from her and from the writing experience. But I think predominantly there's the positives and then also the negatives. And I think from the positive side, I've learned how humanity can be good. There's the story of the liberation book and the American soldiers, which helped Lili and many other survivors get back to normality. And I think that gives people hope for people, especially with Lili, that people are good after seeing such terrible people in Auschwitz for a whole year before that. I think from Lili herself, I've learned the need to give to others. She often says that in Auschwitz, having her two sisters and protecting them, giving love, or even if it was just a word of encouragement to them, how that helped us survive. And I think she often says to me that giving is receiving. So I've definitely learned the importance of giving and positivity, appreciating even the smallest things in life, not just the big things. And then, most importantly, family. I think having to interview her extensively about her life before the war made me realise how similar the life that they lived in Hungary before the war, how similar that is to Jewish life now in London. And we live quite a protected Jewish life here. And I think that made me realise, wow, really, it's not that long ago, and it really wasn't that different to the life we live now. And I think that really made me appreciate the Jewish life that we have here. I go to a Jewish secondary school in Emmanuel College and also in the Shore here, and it's a thriving Jewish atmosphere. So I think it really makes you think, imagine that was all gone within the click of a finger. And then obviously the negatives, you learn what can happen when the world just lets hate spiral out of control. And I've learned the need to stop hatred wherever I've seen it in its tracks. And predominantly that is now on social media. And unfortunately, hate can spread very, very quickly on social media. But I think what I want people to realize, and especially young people, is that you can use social media for good too. And as quickly as hate can spread, love and positivity and important messages can too.
Right. So what I'd like to do is have you read just a little bit about Lili's coming into Auschwitz. You said you didn't want people to read 16 hours here. There's 16 hours of you. I've got a couple of passages that you've got from what she's written and what you have written in the book. And I think it would be nice for people to hear one of the more harrowing ideas.
And I think these were, people often forget how hard it is for a Holocaust survivor to take themselves back to these moments. I think it's 75 years at the time, 75 years later, to go back and remember these details. It was incredibly hard. And no one can really ever comprehend Auschwitz if you weren't there. But I think even just sitting there and listening to her, it was just, I think it first of all made our bond, me and her, much closer, but it also made me realise, as I said before, appreciate life so much more. And so this is what she says about the moment when she arrived in Auschwitz. She says, "I didn't know we had arrived in hell to be greeted by the angel of death. The man who decided so casually whether we would live or die was Joseph Mengele, the most notorious of all the doctors who worked at the camp. These doctors stood on the platform called the ramp and made the first of many, many selections my sisters and I would endure. This is what shocks me. It was doctors, trained physicians, highly educated and cultured men who could have used their education and experience and knowledge to save people's lives, but instead made the decision whether any one of us would walk straight into a gas chamber and die the moment we arrived and be burned. 16 of us in every 20. Or if we would have instead become slave laborers, face the ordeal of multiple selections, and die more slowly from starvation, thirst, exhaustion, disease, overwork, suicide, violence, cold, or in rare cases, like my own, live to tell their story. I didn't know that the stench was burning flesh and bones, and really it was a factory, an extermination factory, in which they always wanted to be ever more efficient, to kill more people in less time."
So, this passage appears, and then she comes to that realization that her mother and two younger sisters are part of that stench, and somebody points that out. You talked about how difficult it was for her to share those memories. I just want to, look at the Dov aspect of this. You were taking notes or recording as she was talking. How did you draw these stories out?
So we had a number of historians who were helping us with this process. I was very lucky that I was able to access the British Library tapes that my great-grandmother had recorded in the early 2000s, and also the USC Shoah Foundation. Spielberg, after he made Schindler's List, went round recording tens of thousands of Holocaust survivors and their testimonies. And my great-grandmother was one of these survivors, and she did a 9-hour recording with Spielberg and his team. And I was lucky that the USC, even online, allowed me to have access to this. So we would listen, and with historians, we would take notes on the specific parts which we wanted to either get more detail from in person with Lili, or which we felt was enough, and we would use that for the book, either by direct verbatim or by asking her how we could change the exact wording. And then when I was actually interviewing her, it was both recording on the phone and on some other recording devices, and then also taking notes just on the computer.
So you're sitting across next to your great-grandmother, and she's talking about coming in front of Josef Mengele. She's talking about the stench of the carriages that they're in, and they kind of with the cattle carts coming into Auschwitz, and then the smell of bodies. And the loss of family members. How do you feel when you watch someone you love addressing these profound emotions?
I think it's a very tough question, because I think it was very hard for me because I was the one that had to ask her these questions and then see her relive that pain, and you can see it very clearly. Because usually she would go to primary schools or secondary schools and give a cover story. I like to call it a cover story, and I reference that in the book. She would give her story, but there would not really be any details, and very many survivors are the same. They give a story which they feel comfortable to tell, and that's completely fine, because that's how they survived and that's how they'll carry on telling their stories. But when I'm the one that has to make her confront and relive these memories, it was very hard for me, and also the historian sitting there, to see that, because you can see the pain in her face. And often we would have to stop, and she would just think for a few minutes, and it could be, we would have to take even, let's say, an hour break, just because it's very, very hard for someone to to just sit there and remember the last moment that they spent with their mother before they saw them being taken left by Joseph Mengele to the gas chambers. And for me, I think it makes you realize how fragile life is. And I think that, again, gave me the real urgency to carry on sharing these stories, because once these survivors aren't here anymore, and I know that you were very close with Eddie Jackow, who unfortunately passed away, I think it was
a couple of days ago.
You know all too well how the survivors are diminishing very quickly and dwindling in number, and once they're gone, no one will be able to give these memories that they saw there in Auschwitz. So I think whilst it was very hard for me to get these questions and ask them, I tried to do them in as sensitive way as possible, but I realized that we have to ask these questions, because if we don't, they'll be forgotten and no one will ever know what happened to Lili Evert's family when they arrived in Auschwitz, or what she saw there. And if we don't ask, then we won't know for the future, and people won't be able to learn. And eventually, when the deniers come and they ask, and they already ask now, we won't be able to give enough answers because we won't have asked enough. And that's, again, something people often ask me, what message do you want people to learn? And I think it's not only with Holocaust survivors, but anyone, people of my age, maybe even younger, ask their grandparents what they went through, what their life story is, because everyone's story is important. And if you don't ask, you will never be able to tell anyone else, and no one will ever know.
So I think it's wonderful that you sat down with historians to fact check the story, because memories can become clouded, and so as you retell stories, you get locked into the narrative. And of course, your mother, your great-grandmother, and other survivors give the cover story, the sanitized version, even at the annual Shoah dinner that we have here, and the opportunity to remember what survivors have and pass on that legacy. Listening to the gritty truth, how did that change you?
I think this might be a bit not silly of me to say, but I think it might have matured me slightly. I mean, I can't really be the one to say, my dad's sitting there. He'll be able to tell you after the.
I see a more mature you. I think
yeah, I certainly feel it gave me a different perspective and outlook on life. When you really learn of the true depths of humanity, you kind of realize, wow, people can be this evil. And I think just about the point that you mentioned when you sit down to fact check, that was very, very important to me. And just in this extract while reading, I remember one thing that we had to check with historians, and the Auschwitz Museum weren't so happy about this, but I included it anyway because it's Lili's words. And it's when we get to the sentence, to be greeted by the angel of death. And there's a big historical argument of whether we should be referencing Nazis as some sort of non-human being. An angel of death makes them sound like they weren't people. They could do this. They could be so evil because they weren't people. But I think what's so important to note is that this was a regular man, and it mentions there, he was a doctor. He had a doctor's degree. He was probably an intelligent man. And that's when I realized that regular people can do such bad things. And I think what I like to look at is actually the positive side of that. If regular people can do such evil things, surely regular, ordinary people like us can do amazing things too. And so hopefully, I guess, yeah, you asked how it changed me, and I think it made me realize that humans can be incredibly evil and can sink so low. Hopefully they can also do great things and go very high in life.
So you talk about your great-grandmother's early years and Lili's childhood, and it was an opportunity, obviously, for her to share memories of her parents, of the village, of brother getting his bar mitzvah or brothers having their bar mitzvahs and studying. It sets the tone of a world. What did you learn about Lili's childhood that gave you a fresh perspective?
Well, firstly, people often ask why do you think you and Lili together as a team have had so much success? And I think, I say success, I mean, success is subjective, but why have we been able to share our story with so many people? I think it's because, and when you read the book, you really realize that our personalities are very similar. And I think you realize that most from her childhood days. Most of the things that she says in the book, like the way she would try and sneak around things without my parents knowing is very similar to what I would have done when I was younger.
I saw that. But even manipulating her brother, who later became a dentist, manipulating her brother to dismantle her parents' watches. That's you, isn't it?
So I think that's one thing we know. Is how similar we are, and I think, yeah. But then, as I said before, it's also striking, and I think it sets the tone very well for the book because it allows a reader to really carry. It's almost as if you're experiencing their life. You go through and you realise how much she lost, and I think that was very much we wanted to do as much character building in a memoir. It's hard, but as much character building as you can as possible at the beginning of the book, so that when it gets to the moment of Auschwitz and when one side is taken left and one is taken right, you can really kind of feel that loss and understand how it must have felt to actually have been there. But then again, what else have I learned from my childhood? It's how vibrant Jewish life is. And yes, I haven't been on the Poland trip yet, but no, I just learned the other day that the Amman Poland trip is now going to go ahead in December. And I think the focus on most Poland trips, and I've not been, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, is to learn about how vibrant Jewish life was in Europe, not just to focus on death.
It's a very important message.
So I think that's what I learned, how even there were two communities, one who we might say is more religious and one less, but still they were both very much community based. And I think that's one thing that I learned, which I hadn't realized before. And the Holocaust often for me before that was just about death and just about specific stories in Auschwitz. But then when I really delved into the book and learned about her childhood, that's when I realized about how important early stories are and to understand what people lost, not just their experience in the camps.
So the book's called Lili's Promise, and promise is a word that is a motif that comes through the story. And if I can now jump ahead to Yom Kippur in Auschwitz and Yom Kippur in 1944. I've got a couple of extracts there which talk a little bit about the idea of promise, and I think maybe Dov, if you could share that with us.
So this is again from Lili speaking about when she was in Auschwitz. This is the first extract. The Yom Kippur we spent in Auschwitz, we knew we had to pray. And though we imagined we could never get hold of the correct mafsa, the special high holy day prayer books, or even a siddur, the little books containing our daily prayers, somehow we all got a portion. I believe somebody must have smuggled out one or two of the hundreds and thousands of prayer books that had arrived with all the transport and ended up in heaps with other abandoned belongings. Then some parts of these had been smuggled up into the women's section. Not enough to go round, of course, not nearly enough. But the flimsy pages were torn out so they could be better hidden. Quietly, secretly, lovingly. Every one of these was shared out so that nobody in our barracks had to pass Yom Kippur without a prayer between their fingers. Maybe not the right prayer, but a prayer nonetheless. And when we had read our own, we swapped, exchanging page for page, so that we could spend as much time as possible in prayer, even as we continued to work.
And then she talks a little bit about the Yom Kippur itself, and we pick up again.
I had survived. So far, all that time I had survived, and so many had not. And I thought there must be some reason for this. My life could not have been preserved for nothing. My mother and my little sister and my brother could not have died for nothing. So, on Yom Kippur 1944, I made myself a promise. If I ever came out of that place, I was determined to do something that would change everything. I had to make sure that nothing like this could ever happen again to anybody. So I promised myself I would tell the world what happened, not just to me, but to all the people who could not tell their stories. And on the day I made that promise, I thought the world would listen. I thought I could do it single-handedly. Perhaps I was a little optimistic, a little naive, but I really believed it.
So we know that, and you've referenced Holocaust denial, we know that the testimony of survivors has not been enough to be able to get the message across. We know that the world is not a changed place. But you certainly have come to the realization that as part of not being able to do it alone, it's important for your generation. You know, I think of myself as the second or third generation from the Shoah. You are another one on. It's important for your generation to take on that mantle and to share the message. How do you think, let's do it the other way around, sorry, Dov. What do you think are the most important messages to share? And then the follow-up question is, how do you think your age group should best do it?
I guess the main thing that I guess the main thing that I usually say is, for my generation particularly, why would I spend a lot of my time educating about the Holocaust, something in the past? And I think it's because if you forget the past, you are doomed to repeat it. And then there's also the fact that a lot of people often say to people like me and younger generation, well, you're young, what impact can you have? But I think it's actually it's completely wrong, because we have to create and we have to build the world that we want to live in the future. And the only people that can do that is us, the younger generations, the people that are going to live in that next generation. And if we want to have a kind world of peace, we have to not only learn the lessons of the past, but put them into practice. We have to stamp out hatred wherever we see it. We have to be vigilant. And as the Jewish community, I think we have a responsibility, because yes, anti-Semitism is on the rise throughout the world, but we can't only focus on anti-Semitism. We have to be there to call out all types of racism, all types of hatred towards anyone in the world. And I think that's one message I would share.
So hatred is one of the things that, you know, I've known from you here as a congregant, as well as it being referenced in the book. You know, when you have shared some of the stories, you've had hundreds of thousands of very positive tweet messages and retweets and everything like that. Let's not just mention Twitter. You've done fabulous things with putting Lili and her birthday on TikTok as well. So you've used social media very much to the best. You've also received some of the most pernicious direct messages. Just give us a flavor of what it is you are receiving and how it is that makes you feel.
I think one example which I could give was, I remember waking up, I think it was just before Shavuot, recent tensions in Israel. And so I woke up one morning and I got a direct message which said, Hitler should have killed your great grandmother and her two sisters. Why didn't he finish them? And something like, you should be killed too. I don't put too much thought to these messages, just because if you do, you won't be able to carry on, you won't be able to have social media, especially when you get these messages quite often. But firstly, I would say the support network is incredible, especially in the Jewish community. The CST were there straight away to help. I do a lot of voluntary work with campaigning against anti-Semitism. Again, what people don't realize is the amount of anti-Semitism on Twitter, which just goes unchecked, and Twitter are happy for that to be left on there. I work in the online investigations department in campaigning against anti-Semitism, and we compile a report every month for Twitter. We send it to them, and they were communicating with us until a few months ago, when they decided that, right, we've had enough, we don't want to be exposed to the anti-Semitism on the app, we don't want to have to take responsibility, and they decided they were just going to block us on email.
Did I just hear an A-level student say, I work in the online investigations department of the campaign against anti-Semitism?
It's a voluntary organisation. It's as many hours as I can do a week, so not that many this year, but I tried to do as much as possible last year. I think given the nature of the work that I do with my great grandma on Twitter and TikTok, it was very easy for me, because most of the day I was seeing this stuff anyway. And the whole job was to identify the worst anti-Semitism on Twitter and then give it to Twitter, who were meant to take it down and give a report of why they took each tweet down. I think only 40% of tweets that we referred to them, and we're not talking about Yid or the Jews are responsible for 9/11, and that's even terrible. We're talking about the worst anti-Semitism you can see, like pictures of Jewish children in the street and people going up to them and not only physically abusing them, putting it on social media, telling people they should be burnt in the gas chambers. We're not talking about basic anti-Semitism here, and only 40% of that was taken down by Twitter. But anyway, how these messages made me feel when I received them was, as I said, I don't really put too much thought to them, but it's very hurtful and disappointing, because you would hope that people firstly learn from the lessons of the past and the Holocaust, but you'd also hope that people realize that I'm just a 17-year-old. I happen to be Jewish. I'm just 17, I'm on social media, and imagine if, I don't know if these people have children, but imagine if their children or them at 17 was receiving these messages and the harm it can do to someone. I'm lucky that I'm able to just look over them and carry on, but I know that other people might not be able to do that, and the harm it can have on someone. And I think it's just the fact that social media companies firstly allow this to happen, and then secondly, the fact that people would want to go out their way and send messages, as I said, to a 17-year-old is just absurd to me. It doesn't make sense.
It's a direct question. If somebody receives an online hate message, what should they do with it?
Definitely don't respond. There's no point. Take a screenshot, send it to the CST. They'll refer it to the police if needed, and then block them, delete. Yeah, block them. Make sure you have a copy of the message, and then just let the CST do the rest of the work. And just, I would say, don't pay too much thought to it. But obviously, there are various people you can talk to if you need to about it.
And slightly more general, what advice would you give people on using social media safely?
Look, I think like anything in life, anything can be used in a good way or bad way, just like a car. You can speed, or you can go under the speed limit, and you can use it for good things. Look, I would just say, and I often, again, I'm told this by my great grandma, but it comes down very simply to what I think it's Hillel says: don't treat others how you would want to be treated. And then on social media, you can just change the words and put it into, imagine you were receiving this tweet. Would you be happy with it? If not, don't tweet it. So that's the general advice that I guess I would give.
Right. What I'm going to do in just a moment is open up to questions. And if I could invite people to put their hands up in the using your raise hand message on the I think it's on the reactions tab on the bottom of your screen. If you have a question for Dov, we'll see if it's going to be possible to have people asking directly and unmuting. I think that might be possible. If not, I might have to ask you to put them in the chat. But just as people are pondering their questions, a couple more thoughts from Dov. These are now his own words within the book. Plugging it again, Lili's Promise.
Okay. This is similar to what I was saying before about how I could sit here all night, just telling you different messages that I've learned from my great grandma, and one of them is towards the end of the book, I think. And I say, Safta always says the Holocaust didn't start with actions, it started with words, and I have seen how dangerous such words can be. And I think, again, that's what I was playing at before with, whenever we see hate, we have to stop it in its tracks, because early on, you'll be able to make a difference, but eventually you come to a stage where nothing you say or do can stop what's happening. And so it's just about recognizing that things don't start with killing. Someone doesn't just build a factory of death overnight. It's a gradual process, it takes years, and it does start with words. And so I guess that's a very simple message. And then the second thing is, I speak about how I was able to find not only the American liberator of my great-grandmother through social media, but also footage of my great-grandmother in Buchenwald concentration camp after liberation. And this is what I say: every miraculous discovery brings me closer to Lili. Each glimpse of her in the archives brings to life another element of history: slave labor, death marches, liberation, the displaced person camps. Above all, the extraordinary challenges faced by young survivors trying to start new lives. Survivors who had their freedom, but nothing else. Lili's story is becoming part of me. It's hard to explain. I just know it. I feel it deep inside. I watched a recording by Rabbi Herschel Schachter, made in 1992. He describes his first moments in Buchenwald and speaks of the need to remember the life of European Jewry before the Holocaust, and to to perpetuate the ideals.
Perpetuate.
I don't know why I can't speak tonight. Perpetuate the ideals for which they gave their lives. He insists that it's up to survivors to keep alive the truths. And he says, the one thing we must remember is that we must remember. We must tell the world. We must not let the world forget. We must continue to tell our children and our children's children. That was also Lili's promise to herself, but it was so much harder to fulfill than she ever imagined. And I think just on that last line, I mean, I write in the acknowledgements of the book that this book really was 76 years since that moment of liberation in the making. And I think when she made that promise, as she says in her part, as I read out before, she might have made that promise in a naive way, thinking that she could change the world overnight. Because I think the impact that Lili's promise has had on the world, and not only the book, but the work that she's done throughout her life has just been, I mean, the amount of people, I can't put a number to it, but the amount of people that she's spoken to in schools, and now on TikTok, we get over 100 million views every 150 days. So I think the amount of people that we've been able to reach has definitely been a fulfillment of that promise. But I don't think she would have ever thought that it would have taken 76 years or maybe even longer.
Social media and a social media savvy great grandson have given her that voice. So a remarkable achievement. So I'm not seeing any hands up, but hang on, there might be something here in the chat. Ooh. Sorry. So Dov, this comes from Joanne. So Dov, what are your plans for the future? Will you be dedicating yourself to a career in anti-hate, anti-Semitism work?
I'm still only in my last year of A-levels, so I'm not sure what the future holds for me. We'll see where the book takes me. It's coming out tomorrow in Hungary. We've got 12 other translations coming in the next year, and then it's being published by HarperCollins in America in May. So hopefully the book will continue to have an impact, and then obviously there's the hope that it will go further and make it to the screens eventually, so that even more people could learn about Lili's story and the Holocaust. Whether I'll pursue a career in anti-hate and anti-Semitism, look, it's tough to tell now what the future holds for me, as I said, and what I'll do, but it's definitely a passion for mine, and I'll continue to be an activist, I guess, in this field for as long as I can, and as long as I have this platform on social media and I'm able to share these messages with the world, I will continue to do so. So hopefully that's the best answer I can give, I guess.
So I've got here, John follows up, well done on getting your book translated into German. Just a story from the last week or so is international authors commenting on the publishing houses that are publishing books. How do you feel about the sort of politicization and cancel culture that gets associated with freedom of speech?
It's a good question. How do I feel? I think it's a tough one. I was just speaking 5 minutes ago about how things like the Holocaust only start with words. So I think at some point you have to take a stance against these things, and you have to say, well, no, this isn't acceptable. But I think there's also times when people have to have opinions and have to argue against things. And I think that creates the society we live in, a democracy. And look, I think there's a fine balance. I'm not going to be the one that draws that balance. But how do I feel? I'm not really sure, I guess. But look, as I said before, words can be dangerous, but words are also necessary for discussion to make things better in life. So yeah, it's a fine balance, and
the opportunity to discuss these things is part of the process of resolving what can and can't be published. Does anybody have any? Are there any hands up?
I would actually just say on that, this is not actually about cancel culture at all, or kind of what you're allowed to say or not. But so I mentioned we have German and Hungarian publication coming soon. We also have the Auschwitz Museum, the first translation ever of a book they're doing is Lili's Promise. Hopefully in the next year or so.
Let you say something, and then someone.
Hang on, I'm just going to mute that one.
And it was, as you know, there's a lot to be said about Polish and the Holocaust. I'm not going to go into that now, but but there's definitely a lot to be said about their role in the Holocaust and the way that they've gone about Holocaust education. And I think when we were going through the process of firstly fact-checking everything with the Auschwitz Museum, they were very specific on certain things. And I think at some point you have to say, well, you have to kind of say, well, we're not going to not say this. And I think that's also an element of that. But also you have to listen to them because they're the experts in the fields. And whilst you might not agree with them, you have to take on their advice. So one of the examples is, for example, the Angel of Death. They did not want that to go in because they're very much about the historical school of thought, which say we shouldn't be making out the Nazis as not human. But I was very much of the camp. This is Lili's book, and this is her words. And in my parts of the book, I make clear the beauty of this book is that there's two parts: Lili's story and then my voice. And I think in my parts, I'm able to make clear the historical arguments and maybe the historical truth in a way, as you said. Memory can also be obviously be distorted by the emotional charge of, let's say, liberation. She might have missed a few things and not really realized the full picture. But the beauty of the book is that I can actually rectify that in my sections and have her sections purely of her voice. But the Auschwitz Museum did not want us to say the Nazi camp in Poland. It had to be in occupied Poland. And I was happy to make that change. Some people might not have been. So I think it's just also about knowing what you're happy to do and your boundaries and that.
So that's very important. Certainly in Polish, went to the Polish Parliament, they passed laws on this. You've had an interesting couple of years with sort of COVID disrupting A-level studies. And you talk about the book being published all around the world, which might give you the opportunity as things ease up a little bit, for you to travel to book launches all around the world during the time when you should be studying for your A-levels.
The American book is coming out 10th of May, which is mid A-levels. So we'll see what happens.
Isn't that that's also the Jubilee here in Shavuot? And, you don't want to miss the Jubilee here. Amazing timing. How has COVID affected you in as much as it's given you opportunities and disrupted your normal life?
Yeah, so of course it's been very challenging. It's been hard for everyone. I'm going to pick my words carefully here. I would say, in a sense, I'm lucky that there's been lockdowns. Of course, no one wants a lockdown, no one wants a COVID pandemic. But for me, the COVID lockdown meant that I didn't have to go to school, which meant that I could spend more time with Lili writing this book, making sure we had all the things needed. We could do much more publicity. And also many more people on social media during the lockdowns. When they were at home, they had nothing else to do. And that meant that we were able to reach millions more people than we might have been able to in a regular year. So look, there's obviously positives and negatives. We haven't been able to fly or go around the country for various book launches. We've done our best. We tried to do as many book signings as possible. But it's been positive in the sense that I was able to write the book, and this opportunity wouldn't have come about without lockdown. But then, of course, no one wishes for a lockdown. No one wishes for the COVID pandemic. So.
Right. I think your words there in their own way mirror you referenced before my former congregant, late Eddie Jaku, able to describe himself as the happiest man on earth because of what he has built out of adversity. And that's certainly not to minimize, and he's able to use words that I couldn't, but the effects of tragedy and people's experiences, but he was one who had the resilience. I suppose it's a lot about individuals. And coming back to individuals, and this is the question which your parents might not want me to be asking as we share it. You talked about your grandmother's childhood and her sort of disruptive influence in the family and the things she got siblings to do. And fortunately, it did stop short of selling off their younger sister. But when I sat down with you those years ago, you're one of the wonderful children who brought vibrancy to Kinloss and its corridors when we were dovening. You now play chauffeur and you're part of the youth service leadership, but you were the youth service nightmare for a short bit. So the question is, what message do you have to the children and to the parents of children who do not fit in the cookie cutter mold of what we want our children to be?
This one is easy for me. I've always said I've got ADHD, said it openly forever. I'm not ashamed of it at all. And I've always said it's very much a gift for me, not a curse at all. I think it's good to be out of the box in life. It allows you to have to be your own self. Why do you need to fit in the box in life? What do you need to be like everyone else? And yes, of course, it was hard for my parents. Well, I say hard, in one sense it might have been hard, but look.
They're the happiest parents on earth.
Exactly, the happiest parents on earth. But look, I think, of course, it's difficult. It was very hard for me to concentrate in primary school. I was very often out of the classroom, probably more than I was in the classroom, and also my early years in secondary school too. But I think that's given me the opportunities to do what I've done now, because if I was just regular and just focusing on schoolwork and just quiet, the book probably wouldn't have come about. People often ask, how did the book come about? I had to go to, I don't know if my dad would like me saying this, but we first got in touch when an agent got in touch with me. It was I wanted my dad to come with the first meeting, but he said, no, you're going by yourself. Because I think if I would have been very quiet, I might not have been able to go out and pitch to a publisher like Pan Macmillan and present the book in the way I did and come up with creative ideas. And I think it's helped me massively now do what I do, also creative ideas on social media, and be able to reach as many people as possible, because I think people like difference in life. It's a tough question, but to the parents, I think, look, everyone's different. And no one's perfect in life. I mean, what even is perfect? So it's just about kind of finding, as I said before, with the cancel culture, the right balance in life, and finding what works best for each person. And for me, that might have been, I don't know, challenging my energy in one way rather than in the classroom shouting out and disturbing. It might have been hard then, but hopefully now might have rectified that about a bit. And hopefully the book is. I mean, a lot of people used to think that maybe it might hinder my life in the future, the way that I was out of the classroom a lot and disturbing a lot. But I think hopefully this has shown people that it really made no difference. I mean, if anything, I think it's made a positive outcome in my life. So. Right.
I think we look at some of the outstanding identities who are the Holocaust survivors and who, I don't know, Estrim Shana, have lived remarkably long lives despite adversity. I think there's something in the resilience and their grit, but also you see in their chutzpah and possibly disruptive personalities that have given them an edge. Yeah. And that edge is sometimes a blessing. So I'm going to conclude with a blessing, because on in the 16th of December 2016, I would have said, may the Lord bless you and keep you, because that's what I say to absolutely every bar and bar mitzvah child, and I say to my kids on a Friday night, and it's a part of our tradition. But I said that then because you were part of a process. Now I want to say, may the Lord bless you and keep you, because Dov, I think you are a blessing.
Thank you.
And I think you are a guardian. You're a guardian of memory who shares. And one of the ideas that Lili brings out in her part of Lili's Promise is the idea that, it is the giving and it is the sharing that is the recipe for preserving the memory and creating the better world. And you are part of that sharing of the memory. And please God will be part of creating a better world. Thank you for joining us. Please take the opportunity to acquire for yourself a copy of Lili's Promise, to enjoy it, and to be a part of sharing the very, very special memories that I think are very much enhanced by the synergy of Lili and her great grandson, Dov Forman. Thank you very much. Good evening all.